I know Game of Thrones is over, which I'm incredibly sad about, so I figure a good Game of Thrones meme is a good way to start. Um, my name is Luther Hill. I'm a data scientist. I work for the Army's medical department. I work in the operations department, so I do a lot of analysis on marketing spend. So next time you hear about somebody spending a bunch of money on marketing and hiring people and firing people and building stuff, it's not my fault. It's somebody in Chicago who just fired them. Really, it was like $36 million a month of waste. Yeah. But moving on from there, what we're trying to do is build a data workflow. A lot of my job involves, and I'm sure like a lot of data scientists involves, a lot of repeatable processes. I usually do the same report, same kind of analysis, use the same data on my models fairly consistently. So I try to automate a lot of like as much as I can. Initially, the way I did that was the good old-fashioned cron job. Everybody loves a good cron job. I love a good cron job. It's the best thing ever. My girlfriend, on the other hand, did not like my cron job because I set up a small Raspberry Pi server in the house that I was just kind of using to offload a lot of random data and just a bunch of random stuff. So one day, I wanted to scrape some Twitter data, and then I set up a cron job. I've like most good data scientists, I completely forgot about the cron job. It ran for days and weeks on end. At the end of it, I tried to log on to do something, some minor nonsense, and then it just wouldn't work. And I'm like, what's going on? What's happening? It's got to be Raspberry Pi. This thing, is horrible. It's worthless. So I log on there, and sure enough, my 6 gigabyte memory stick was completely full of tweets. That's a lot of. Yeah, you can imagine, that's a lot of tweets. I mean, that's a lot of tweets, but that's to show you the power of a cron job. So the basic agenda is going to talk a little bit about myself, talk about data science as I see it, talk about the problem statement, do a little bit of hands-on, not anything super live, but we'll kind of look at the data and then talk about the conclusion. So like we talked about me, that's me right there. My major interest really is in more healthcare, equity, healthcare stuff. This is how I got started for Apache-Airflow, actually, because once again, I was trying to automate another web scraping process for something else that I'm doing. And then I realized that the cron job was not going to work this time. It was definitely not going to work. I needed something more repeatable. I needed something that I could start, stop, that I could throw some actual workload at, and also really set up a process. So it got me started looking at Apache-Airflow, and I decided to do this presentation about it. I'm also really passionate about diversity and inclusion in tech, so it's always great when I come to conferences like this and I see a lot of people being represented from different backgrounds. I really love that, so it's really amazing. Data science truths as I see them, a lot of people have this misrepresentation of what data science is. I think a lot of data science, the easy statistic is 80% of what I do is really data engineering. I was having a great conversation with somebody in the back about that very thing, where it's most of the models, unless you're doing something maybe at Google, Waymo, Facebook, where everything is custom, a lot of what you're doing is just really about engineering. It's really about how do I move data from point A to point B? How do I connect to this database? How do I clean my data? And then how do I, at the end, produce a result? Whatever that might be it. I like to think it's a fancy new model that is going to change the world. Sometimes it's just an interesting visualization of our marketing spend. It's an interesting visualization of our operations, of patient sentiment, what they think about us, because all the doctors like to know, what does my patient think about me? How do they, leave me good reviews, bad reviews? And it's kind of hard to discern that when you have anything from a Facebook page, you have a website with comments, you have a Twitter, you have random notes in a bucket somewhere. So you're trying to figure out, how can I put all those things together, and then how can I get them to do something? So humans are more important than the data up front. I really believe that, because at the end of the day, the data can't make a decision. Only a human being can actually make a decision and take action to do something with it. Your data is only good as your storytelling. The data itself is not going to convince anybody. The model is not going to convince anybody. Your fancy data pipeline is not going to convince anybody. What's really going to convince somebody is solving a problem and telling a story with the data. Your data is biased, and so are you. We hear about it all the time as far as data bias. I think Google had a big thing recently where they paid a bunch of people to go out to Atlanta and other heavily African American cities to get more pictures of African Americans so that their machine learning algorithm wouldn't be so biased against African Americans and people of color, which I didn't know was a thing. I'm like, okay, sounds good. But that just goes to show you the machine only really knows what you tell it. It's biased. If you feed it a bunch of data with one particular thing, that's what it's going to solve for. So you have to understand that, and you have to build your pipeline to, once again, reflect some diversity, not only in images, but in numbers, in data sources, in different things like that. It gives you a more complete picture. So a basic problem statement is, I went to PyCon this year. It was my first time attending, really great for anybody who hasn't gone. But the basic thing we're going to try to solve is we're a marketing firm, and we just want to find out what people think, what people on Twitter specifically think about PyCon, right? We want to mine the tweets and figure out did they like it, did they not like it? Or even if we come here, right, we want to look at the comments and say, did they like it, did they not like it? What was interesting, what was not, what was the engagement. So we do that first by admitting the truth, which is your data is dirty. It's absolutely filthy. If you take a look at it, it really is. If you take a look at it, there's anything from missing values, which you have to account for. There's incorrect values, which you have to account for. You know how it is with users. They kind of just do their own thing. You ask them for a number, they put in a string. You ask them for a picture, they put in a bunch of text. It's just what it is. The other thing, too, if it's in your database, it's already good, right? It made it to the database, it must be golden. It is the truth. No? So we have to understand that, and we have to engineer around those different things. So part of the presentation, we're going to talk about data engineering just as a general process. Like anything else, there has to be a process. Airflow is just a tool. It doesn't solve the underlying problem, which is how do we build an effective data pipeline? How do we take data from point A to point B? What Airflow does, it makes it repeatable, it makes it trackable, it makes it consistent, but it doesn't actually solve the bigger pipeline issue there. So what we have to look at is, one, we have to engineer a solution. We have to think about what databases are we connecting to. Apache-Airflow is open source, so it has a lot of really great connectors. It can connect to Mongo, SQL, AWS, Azure, all the different cloud platforms. So there's a lot of different connectors in there. I actually built my connector around the Tweepy API to connect to, using my own credentials to connect to Twitter's API backend and then get tweets out of there. And for anybody who's following politics, which I don't know if anybody is, Twitter's a very big thing right now. And the current status is that you can get back to 30 days of user data. So I could go in and mine the last 30 days on a rotating basis of what people were saying about any given topic. Prior to 2016, it used to be as far back as you wanted. So I don't know if anybody knew what happened in 2016, why they might have changed Twitter and don't want you just open wide access anymore, but it's not like that anymore. So first we have to think about connecting to the database. Then the next thing is the preparation of the data. Like we talked about, the data is dirty, right? How many of us in here have opened up a database and what should be a null is a string? What should be a string is a number. What should be a user ID is an emoji. Because it was an interesting putting this presentation together, and I was I was just like on the terminal doing some stuff, and for some reason, Apple allows you to add emojis. So there's like, I wrote some code in VS Code where I could actually print out an emoji, like the actual unicorn emoji. Something, and now I thought to myself, like, I wonder if I could put that in a database. Like that'd be kind of cool to like figure out a way to get that emoji in a database and really mess with the administrator there. So a good data pipeline is reproducible, which is why data pipeline as code, much like you have DevOps or infrastructure as code, is very, very powerful. Because otherwise, what happens in the data science world is that it tends to be a very one-off process. It tends to be me kind of ad hoc or making something very custom for that one particular use case, and then I forget about it, and then 6 gigs later, trying to restart my Raspberry Pi. So by making it code, we can have version control over it, right? So now our data pipeline version 1 could be doing one particular thing, but then through iteration realize, okay, this isn't that good. Let's do version 2. So now we have data pipeline version 2. And why that's important for a lot of businesses, especially what I do, which is working for the government, very heavily regulated, very security focused. And when that young man was talking about NIST, I like 100% understood it, because NIST is the documents that I live and die by. Like, we're all about NIST because it's all about federal government. So that I have to be able to show how I did things. And Airflow allows me to do that because I can go back to the code and say, this was version 1 of my code, execute it, and have a reproducible result, versus I kind of custom make my own code, and then it ends up, version 1 is not the same as version 2. I don't know where version 2 is. I forgot about it. So it just makes it a little bit easier. And analytics is really what a lot of the data, that's the answer that you're trying to get. And Apache-Airflow also helps with that as well, because you can, as part of your workflow, kick out CSV files, text files. You can kick out visualizations. You can store it to an S3 bucket. So literally, you could have your entire pipeline from scraping Twitter to cleaning that data, taking out any crazy emojis, and then running an analysis on it and storing that analysis in a CSV file or an S3 bucket, completely automated end-to-end, and also version controlled. So if you wanted to go later on and change it, you could totally do that. Some basic Airflow concepts. So we have task instance, DAG, and DAG run. A task is a unit of work. So there's a particular thing that you're asking Airflow to do. You could run multiple tasks at the same time. You could have multiple task instances, but that's the way to think about it. It's like you're asking the computer to do this one particular thing. A DAG, and I'm probably going to mess up the way I say this, directed acyclical graph. Directed acyclical graph is a fancy way of saying that the graph has order. It has a sequence. So Apache-Airflow will always do things in the sequence that you set through the code. So if you want to go to the Twitter API first, then you want to hit up Instagram's API, which is also a very rich source of data, and then combine both of those things into one database or one data table, and then export it to a CSV file, you could do that. Now you have 2 very different social media platforms, 2 very different social media information sources put together. One analysis that I ran that I found very interesting was a lot of businesses tend to have similar names or handles across different social media platforms, but they tend to put out very dissimilar messages across those platforms. Meaning that on Twitter, you might, be very. A great example was the NBA. I love basketball. It's what I follow. So anybody heard about the NBA controversy of China? Yeah. Right? You heard about that, where on the English media, they put out a very kind of muted, we're not supportive of it. We're kind of like want to stay out of it message. But on the Chinese media, they put out this very bad Houston Rockets type message. We're with you, people of China. We don't think it's the right thing that they did. Had to come back and clean it up when somebody showed that, hey, it's two very different messages. So it's a very interesting analysis that you could run by saying, okay, well, show me what the NBA is saying on Twitter about a particular subject, and show me what they're saying on Instagram, Facebook, or even in their own website about a particular subject. And you can put those in one database and run analysis against that. So all those things are very, very interesting. But to go back to the DAG has an explicit execution order that you set. So it'll only do things in the order that you set. And if one part of the process fails, just like code, then that entire process will fail. You can put if statements around it to build some workflow control, but you have to do that explicitly. It's not going to do it on its own. So it's a very explicit type language. So some things we talked about, some parts of, and you'll see this in the next slide where it goes into the overall layout of Apache-Airflow. So biggest thing is workflow as code. Who in here works in DevOps? 1, 2, okay. I saw somebody shaking their head, so dev-ish? Okay, good enough. Being in data science, there's no DevOps for data science. I mean, anybody who's ever done any kind of analytic workload, anything, it doesn't have to be machine learning, just really any analytics, it tends to be very custom. It tends to be very kind of one-off where even though the report that you're pulling is the same every month, it just seems like every month you're relearning the entire process. So what this allows you to do is add a little bit of DevOps flavor to it. A big thing on the software engineering side has been really that push to DevOps, push to infrastructure as code, push to continuous integration deployment, right? On the data science side, that tooling is very much lacking. So this is a push to do that. The scheduler is exactly what it says. It allows you to schedule a workflow. So let's say you want to hit Twitter's API at midnight every night. Or once you pull that Twitter API, you want to then store it in your local S3 bucket at 3 a.m. every night. You can schedule those things at a very specific time. So it's really, really great for that. The executor, execute your command. The metadata database is not a database for the information. It stores the state of your DAG. So it stores, did your DAG, your graph, your instructions, did they complete? If so, at what stage did they complete? Did they go all the way through? Did one particular thing fail? Did two things fail? What time they failed? So it allows you to get those error messages and then go back and analyze the problem and say, okay, what is happening? What is causing the failure? Versus with something like a cron job, you really don't know if it works or if it doesn't. You might come back at 3 o'clock the next day and then it worked, and you come back at 3 o'clock the day after that and it doesn't, and you won't know till then. Defining tasks, same thing. You have to be explicit in your instruction set. You have to tell it exactly what it has to do. So this is the basic architecture of Airflow. If you look at it on the left-hand side, the message queue it currently uses Celery, which is, I want to say, allows one task at a time, but you can use different executors. You can plug in different executors, SQL Alchemy, different things, to be able to execute multiple tasks or do different things. You have the scheduler, which allows you to execute your task. You have your metadata database, which allows you to store the state of each individual task, completion status. The web server is just a really cool UI. Once again, cron jobs don't have a UI, so it's hard to, I'm a very visual person, so it's hard for me to go into a cron job and kind of diagnose what worked, what didn't, or even just see all the different cron jobs I have running at the same time. So we'll actually play with that as a local server. The code repository is where you just store your code, and the worker is what actually does the work. So debunking the DAG, this is what a DAG looks like. A DAG doesn't have to be one linear thing, or not one linear thing, but basically just 1, 2, 3, 4. It could be multiple things. Like you see here, it goes A, B, C, D. So you could set up where, once again, workflow statements where, okay, if this error comes back, or if I get this type of data, or this amount, or this kind of call, I want you to execute this function. If I get something else, then I want you to execute this function. So it allows you to build a more comprehensive workflow and then be able to visualize that and interact with it in a more visual manner. So you can see that because, like we talked about, it is directed and it is very task-oriented. You have to specifically tell it what to do and in what order to do it. That's what makes it an acyclical graph. All right, so we're going to do some basic hands-on, nothing super fancy. We're just going to look at the web server, look at some DAGs, look at some example codes, and the entire Apache-Airflow thing I forgot to mention is actually written in Python. So if you know how to write Python, then you can actually interact with Apache-Airflow. It's not its own specific language or code or anything else. It's all in Python. Uses the standard dot notation and everything else. We'll use a local MySQL database where I have some Twitter data stored on there, not 6 gigs this time. And then you need a Twitter developer account, which is separate from your actual Twitter account. If you just go to Twitter, you type in Twitter developer account, you get an API access key, and you have full access. That's where a lot of the Twitter bots you see, that's how they implement their bots. They don't actually point and click, they just make calls to and from the API and do actions and different things. So let's see if we can do some cool stuff. All right, so first thing we'll look at, all right, so these are some of the example DAGs that we have on there, right? This is just what comes standard, and they also give you a lot of very standard DAG executors, so you can build upon them. They're really good. It's just example code. So let's look at the basic hello world one that I wrote up real quick. Can you see that, kind of? All right, so let's look at a graph view. So that's so this hello world task that I wrote 2 things. One was a dummy task, and then that fed into the hello world task. So you see that there's 2 defined tasks. Let's look at the actual code itself. So this is what an Airflow code would look like. I pass it some default arguments. I have my default DAG. So it's really simple. It's basic Python code. So anybody who's ever worked with Python can immediately start using the system. There's less, you don't have to learn a bunch of different ways to do things. And then this web server gives you a lot of really cool functionality. You can have a chart show you, Gantt chart show you the percentage complete of each task. Well, there's no data here, but you can see the amount of you can see the task duration. So you can track different metrics. You can see, okay, how long did this particular task take to get accomplished? You can also see a tree view, which is similar to a graph view and just shows you all the subdirectories, all the different things the task has to do. Let's see if we can find a more complicated one. Let's see this one. All right. So if you look at this is what I talked about in sense that you can write your DAG so that it follows a particular workflow based on the result it gets. So it doesn't have to be just one linear operator this is the only thing it can do. It can do multiple things based on the conditions that you set, and then also based on the state that was returned to it from when the code was executed. So it's really powerful for workflow development. And then if you look at the code in here, Once again, it's all simple Python code. You import the Airflow utilities, you pass it some arguments, you build a DAG function, and from the web server, you can actually trigger it, you can refresh it, you can do all the different things that you would do from the command line. All right. So let's take a look at, let's take a look at, oh, there we go. Can you see that? Can you not see that? What does it look like? It's small? It's bigger? All right. Better? Okay, so this is actually the configuration file for Airflow. So if you look at it here, I'm trying to look. You can build very specifically what you want. You can actually set your connections to different database stores. I'm just using a local database, so I made sure it only pointed to my local database. Let's see. All right. So a lot of different functionality. Most of it, to be honest, I don't really use because I don't use this at work so much. Because it's the government, we have a lot of internal special tooling we use, but a lot of times when I do things on my own, I tend to use this kind of tool. All right, so let us get out of here, and then let's, I don't know, let's take some fun and look at some Twitter comments about Python. All right, so this is a table that I created to store some tweets. Twitter has really a great API and also like a great code examples to connect to the database. I use Tweepy because Tweepy is an open source GitHub repository that module that allows you to connect to the Twitter API by setting your username, API key, and everything else. So it makes connecting very, very easy. So what we're going to do is, I made some Twitter language. No, I don't want to do language. So I don't know, let's just see what language we have, because part of this thing is that Twitter, depending on how stuff is going, gives you different things. So for the language setting, you can tell they don't give you the language anymore, so that's one of the changes they made. It used to be you could have the language used by that individual user, but that's no longer a field they support. So not happening there. Let's see, what else? Language long, describe, show user. Let's look at, you know what? Let's show the tables again. Show tables. All right, let's look at some, let's look at some tweets. Tweet, and then let's look at the user as well. Let's see who has, I don't know. A lot of these Twitter followers don't actually have a lot of followers. A lot of Twitter users don't have a lot of followers, surprisingly. greater. So we want anybody who has more than, let's say, 10 followers. All right. So we can already tell one of the first things we're going to have to build in to our DAG is take out all of the non-English characters there, right? So we can just look at it and see, first we have, I don't know, let's look at this one. Monty Python, we're officially 50 today, so somehow Monty Python got caught up in my Twitter pool for Python, but that's kind of to be expected. So that, that's something that we're going to have to engineer out. What else? A lot of I guess whatever day I pulled this was the 50th anniversary of Monty Python. So just a lot of a lot of Monty Python comments. Oh, okay. And then somebody on here said Lisp, totally hate Lisp. They don't like Lisp. Nice. A lot of Monty Python comments, just a lot. Monty Python. I'm going to have to redo this query because it's just a bunch of Monty Python. And then we have Spanish in there, but we know from, what is it? Programming, oh, here we go. Some programming languages. Yeah. Oh, we have Chinese characters in there. So there's a lot of different things. Let's see if we can, I don't know, make it less. So let's see anybody maybe who has 30 or more followers. Still a lot. Yeah, so it really ends up being a lot of, the incredible growth of Python. For us, there's a Stack Overflow link that they posted. Oh, Carrier announces Shasta software. So it's a lot of different things people are tweeting about. They had Raspberry Pi, a lot of, I don't know. Oh, Raspberry Pi, my current temperature. Okay, so this is very interesting right here. So we can tell that this comment, the Hilltop TRG, was more than likely somebody set up a Raspberry Pi to tweet out the current temperature, right? So yeah, because current temperature, I guess whatever location they're at. So people are using Python, Twitter for all kinds of different things. Yeah, interesting. All right, so I'm going to open it up for questions because I just wanted to do a very kind of easy introduction into it, show you some of the things you could do, talk about it, and hopefully somebody out there has used it a little bit more than I have because I've pretty much used it for Twitter, Instagram, and some basic web scraping to just gather a bunch of data that I'm using for something else.
All right, so folks got some questions for Luther? I guess there's some on the Slido. If you don't mind, please repeat them.
Yeah, sure. Can Airflow be used on secure non-cloud networks from a single PC? Is it a Python package or a separate application? Okay, so let's start with the last one first. Is it a Python package or a separate application? It's a Python package. So if you just do, pip install Apache-Airflow, it'll install it, it'll set up everything for you. And then the next one is, can it be used from a single PC? Can it be used from on a secure non-cloud network? So from a single PC, yes, because I'm using it from my single PC. Can it be used from a secure non-cloud network? So because I deal with a lot of secure environments, are you talking about something that is air-gapped, where the computer is standalone by itself? Or is it something that is just not connected to the cloud?
I want to know about your government experience. Do you use this with Army and government?
Oh, okay. Well, I will say first off that they don't necessarily want us advertising what tools we do and do not use for obvious reasons. But it can be used on a secure network, yes. Once again, goes back to NIST and what kind of data or database you're accessing. A lot of the database stuff that I access revolves around marketing and budgeting, and also personnel data, not patient data, but personal data about our doctors and their reviews, what patients think about them or think about our facilities. So yeah, it could be used for that. Um, yeah, that's it. I encourage you to just kind of play around with it, because the biggest thing that I found while using it is that it's very powerful, but it's not, at least in my world, not very widely used. So not a lot of developers know about it. A lot of people I know are still stuck using cron jobs. It's just the nature of the government. We use the oldest technology possible. So we're not really fully up to speed on it, so I'm trying to get my organization up to speed on it. We also work with a lot of very old databases. So that's something that I would like to explore with this tool as well. Like, how does it, so far when it comes to AWS, because I use AWS and Azure for a lot of my own personal work and also some stuff at work, it connects very well. MySQL, everything connects, great connectors there. But I don't know how it would do against more unique type databases that people might have out there in the wild that's not on the cloud, or maybe some database on-prem. You know? So any other questions about anything else?
Oh, let me bring the microphone to you.
So you talked about scheduling jobs on Airflow. Do you know if but I saw the message queue. Do you know if like you can send a request to a server running Airflow to say like, hey, can like add something to the queue and like ask it from the outside world to do something, or is it only for internally scheduling work?
So you mean is a task running already, or is it something that like the task is not running but you want to change the task?
Yeah, like let's say Airflow is doing nothing,
Mm-hmm.
and from like a different application, I want to tell Airflow to kick off a task. Is that possible to your knowledge?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, one, because it has the web server, and it also has the command line interface that you can get access to the different schedulers. And because it's Airflow, you can call it as a function, because what you're doing effectively is you're building a Python function using some Airflow APIs and some Airflow packages. So you could implement it. It doesn't have to reside just in Airflow. It could be in any piece of code that you're using. Yeah, so that's actually really a good use case. I've done it once, but I probably should do it more often, because you can take it and put it somewhere else. You just have to make sure the package and the module is there.